We had a trade go down yesterday in the NBA. Nick Richards heading to the Phoenix Suns, and that's not all. There's more buzz out there on the trade market right now, heading into the February 6th trade deadline. On today's show, I want to get into all of the latest going on around the league. I'm Trevor Lane. This is the Basketball Bulletin. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Stay up to date on all things related to the trade deadline. All right, here we go. This is from Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype. Some fantastic intel here. The Golden State Warriors and Steph Curry have preached patience, but if you saw it after last night's game, Curry also was saying that he is not okay with just being an average team at all. That's not what he meant when he was talking about the team not being willing to sacrifice too many future assets, not going all in for the team right now. He's not okay with being an average team. And the Warriors right now are reluctant to trade Jonathan Kuminga, according to Michael Scotto. So Kuminga is the main piece that the Warriors have to trade, the main piece that teams would be interested in. For example, if they do decide to get into the mix for the Miami Heat star Jimmy Butler, then Jonathan Kuminga is the guy that the Miami Heat are going to ask for, and most teams are going to ask for him. Now, over the summer, they did not come to terms on a contract extension with Kuminga, so he will hit restricted free agency this coming summer. $7.6 million under contract right now, young player, 22 years old, pretty talented, and maybe somebody that the Warriors could flip into a win-now piece, but the Warriors are trying to be careful that they don't sacrifice their future just in an attempt to help Draymond and Steph Curry win right now. There's no question after a hot start, the Warriors have underperformed, but if they're going to make any kind of significant addition to their team, they're going to have to become willing to give up Jonathan Kuminga or be willing to part with some future first-round draft capital, and maybe both, depending on how much of a swing they want to take here. So unless they're willing to give up Jonathan Kuminga or give up some of that future draft capital, well, it's going to be tough for the Warriors to change some things. What's interesting is they've continued to do their due diligence on the trade market, looking for front court upgrades, particularly Nikola Vucevic, John Collins, Jonas Valanciunas, Rob Williams. So what's interesting is these are all players that theoretically should be available for second-round draft capital, not first-round draft capital, especially we've seen it so far over the trade market. We've seen Nick Richards, we've seen Dorian Finney-Smith, we've seen Dennis Schroeder. These guys are all going for second-round draft capital. They're not going for first-round picks. And it seems like the Warriors, if these are truly their targets, are zeroing in on guys that would not require them to sacrifice future first-round draft capital. But I think it's fair to ask, are these guys moving the needle for Golden State? Are these guys really going to get the Warriors where they want to go? I would say probably not. Now, Robert Williams, if he's healthy, maybe, but that's a huge if with Robert Williams. Nikola Vucevic, if he keeps playing the way he's been, if he's truly a 20-10 guy, shooting an insane percentage from three, maybe he becomes a needle mover. John Collins, I like John Collins a lot. He could score the hell out of the ball. He is a good player, but he's also making $26 million. The value on his contract may not be there. And then Jonas Valanciunas, well, I struggle to see, aside from the rebounding help, how he's going to fit with the Warriors. But nonetheless, they're looking at guys that can primarily be had for second-round draft capital. Scott also notes that the chances of Golden State acquiring wing targets like Jimmy Butler and Cam Johnson have decreased. There's your first-round pick, guys, right? Those are your players that you're going to have to give up first-round draft capital, which to me just adds more credibility to this notion that Steph Curry said, that Steve Kerr said, that Draymond Green said about not wanting the team to give up too much of their future in order to win right now. If they're not in on Jimmy Butler, they're not in on Cam Johnson, that tells you they're not in on giving up future assets, real assets. Instead, they're going to look to make minor tweaks and hope that Steph Curry can go on a heater in the playoffs. I know Warriors fans, that's probably not what you want to hear. That's not what you want to hear about the Warriors' plans. But if all of this is accurate, and it could be this is smoke, but it sounds to me like the Warriors are only targeting players that are going to cost second-round draft capital and nothing more to acquire. That may be a little bit concerning for Warriors fans moving forward. All right, let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. I think this is interesting. The Bucks, they are also looking to make a move in the NBA's Eastern Conference. They want to do something that's going to allow them to move on up in the standings and maybe quiet down all the teams that are lining up saying, hey, at some point we would love to trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Well, of course. I mean, who wouldn't want to trade for Giannis. Right now, 29 teams want to trade for Giannis. But the Bucks, right now, the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, they've won their last 2 games. The Magic lost a game. The Magic have dealt with a ton of injuries and dealt with it pretty well, frankly, on the season. But the Milwaukee Bucks, man, after a rough start, they're now 22-17, just 12 games back. I mean, that is a ways back, and they're not making a run at the 1 seed or anything like that. But they are right in the thick of things. They have home court advantage right now if the playoffs were to start today in round 1. But they also know that in order to get up to that next tier, to get even with the Knicks, to get up to that Knicks tier, I think they've got moves they need to make. And certainly to get to a point where they can contend with Boston or Cleveland, who I believe are the cream of the crop here in the Eastern Conference. I know there's a 6.5 game gap between the Celtics and the Cavs. I do believe that gap is going to close because the Celtics have one of the easiest remaining schedules in the NBA, whereas the Cavs do have a somewhat difficult, though they've been playing fantastic basketball, only 5 losses on the season. But to get to a point where they can contend with those teams, the Bucks are going to need to make moves. The problem is they're a tier 1 apron team. And as a tier 1 apron team, tier 2 apron team, that means they cannot aggregate salaries in a trade. They could only trade players by themselves. So the buzz is growing that what the Bucks are going to try to do is dump Pat Connaughton. Dump Pat Connaughton potentially on the Detroit Pistons. They're the team that has cap space, really the only option to dump Pat Connaughton to clear his salary off the books. That would drop them below the second tier apron, and then they could find a move where they could aggregate salaries in a trade and try to add some firepower to this team. Now, they've also been connected to Jimmy Butler, but the Miami Heat, while they would love to be able to have another team to talk to about a Butler trade, they can't really because Jimmy Butler has made it clear he doesn't want to play for the Bucks. Now, is it possible the Milwaukee Bucks just say, you know what, Jimmy? We know you said you don't want to be in Milwaukee, but we don't care. We're going to trade for you anyway, and we're going to hope that when we get you, Dame, and Giannis together, that's going to be enough to convince you that Milwaukee is actually the place that you want to be. It could happen. It could happen. It's happened before. I mean, hey, Toronto did it with Kawhi, and Kawhi didn't wind up staying, but it worked out. They won a championship. Could the Bucks be in that mode with Jimmy Butler where they just say, you know what? We don't care if he doesn't want to be here. We're going to roll the dice, and we're going to assume that he's going to show up, and the market's not going to be that kind to him this summer anyway. He's probably going to wind up picking up that $52 million player option. So at the very least, we're going to get him this season and probably next season too, unless he wants to go sign somewhere for a mid-level exception, which we don't buy that he's going to do because the Brooklyn Nets and the Washington Wizards, the 2 teams with cap space, they're not going to sign him. There's no place for Jimmy to go. We'll take that risk. I could see Milwaukee talking themselves into it. How would they get there? Well, that's where you're talking about stacking up some salaries. Do you stack up, say, Chris Middleton? Well, I mean, Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, that would get you there and then some. I'm sure those aren't the ideal pieces that they would want to move. They could stack up a few other salaries if they could. Do we look at, and again, it would take moving Pat Connaughton in the deal as well in order to get below that second tier apron, but we could be talking about something around Bobby Portis maybe. You can add a few salaries in, and away you go. Now, would the Miami Heat want to take on Chris Middleton with that player option for next year? Probably not. But if they can be incentivized with some other talent coming in, maybe some future draft capital, something like that, maybe they can find something. Let's face it, Jimmy Butler's value is certainly depressed. And the Miami Heat have plenty of incentive to move on from him, clear the air around their team, try to start winning games, and try to make a push in the Eastern Conference. So I wouldn't just write off the Milwaukee Bucks, particularly if we're already getting these rumors that they're going to try to move on from Pat Connaughton and see what they can do with that to duck below that second tier apron so they can aggregate salaries. The Suns and the Hornets, not done here. Nick Richards going to Phoenix for Josh Okogie and a net of 2 second-round picks going to Charlotte. Charlotte sends 1 back to Phoenix. The Suns send 3 to the Hornets. Now, the 3 that the Suns are sending to the Hornets should be higher in value than the 1 that they're sending back. So they're adding a little bit of value to the Hornets. But as this is what I predicted was going to be the case, Yusuf Nurkic was initially in the trade talks, and the Suns wanted Cody Martin back in the deal. So they wanted it to be Nick Richards and Cody Martin for Yusuf Nurkic. That was what the Suns wanted the deal to be. As we talked about, though, and we talked about this a few days ago, it doesn't make a lot of sense from the Hornets side to take on Yusuf Nurkic to be an $18 million this season, $19 million next season backup center to Mark Williams. That just doesn't make any sense. That there's no reason, even if the Suns are including their future second round draft capital, as much as they can get a hold of, it's probably not worth it for the Hornets. Now, if the Suns said 2031 first, yeah, that probably changes things, but the Suns shouldn't be willing to give up a 2031 first just to turn Yusuf Nurkic into Nick Richards. So now the Suns were able to come up with a compromise. They trade Josh Okogie instead, who's on a non-guaranteed deal for next year, and the Hornets may wind up just turning around and flipping him. They could flip him as an expiring contract. And Cody Martin remains available on the market, non-guaranteed salary next year as well. And that's somebody they could look to move on from now. So the Hornets are very much in asset acquisition mode. They're trying to add more assets. So don't be surprised if Cody Martin does wind up getting moved, but it was not going to happen in this deal in a trade that was going to bring back Yusuf Nurkic. That didn't make sense for the Hornets. They struck a compromise, getting back an expiring salary or a non-guaranteed salary in Josh Okogie. They could turn around and flip him, plus the second round draft capital. And again, this really drives home the point that non-starter level players, look, Nick Richards, the word is he may indeed start for the Phoenix Suns, but he's probably quality-wise, he's more of a backup level big. Is he a locked-in starter on every team around the NBA? No. So that type of player, a solid role player, let's say that, is going for second-round draft capital. Teams are not willing to give up first as long as it's expiring salary going in the trade. I think where we'll see teams start to part with first is when it's non-expiring salary, because teams are so worried about the new CBA moving forward. They're going to have to be incentivized with first-round draft capital to take back non-expiring salary, particularly if it's bad non-expiring contracts. The Phoenix Suns are definitely not done. They're going to do everything they can to try to continue to make moves. They want to move Bradley Beal, and they want to turn him into Jimmy Butler. But as Scoto notes, the problem is there is no third team that wants to take on Bradley Beal's contract. Look, Beal is a good player. He's a good player. He's talented. He's just not worth $50 million, and he's not worth the headache of the no trade clause that he's got. So right now, teams are just not interested in trading for Bradley Beal, which means the Phoenix Suns really can't get Jimmy Butler. There isn't a path to that. The Miami Heat are among the teams that do not want Bradley Beal, and I don't blame them. So Jimmy wants to go to Phoenix. The Suns want Jimmy, but I don't see it happening unless something drastic changes here in the situation with Beal, and unless some third team steps up and suddenly talks themselves in to wanting him. Now, Phoenix is going to continue to try to trade Nurkic. Why? Because right now they have 4 centers that they can use under contract. That's just too many. They've got Nurkic, they've got the rookie Oso Ighodaro, they've got Mason Plumlee, and now they have Nick Richards, who's rumored to be their starter. Frankly, all they really need is Ighodaro and Richards, and they're good. They don't even need Plumlee either. So there are moves that they can make here. However, just like the Bucks, they are well above, even way past the Bucks, the second-tier apron, which means they can't aggregate salaries in a trade. They did find a way, though, to go get Nick Richards, so credit to them. Look, Phoenix has been operating under some very, very strict confines here under the new collective bargaining agreement, and you got to give them credit. They've found ways to make moves and still make changes to their roster, and frankly, they've done pretty well. I know they haven't performed well, but in terms of asset management, I think they've actually done fairly well given the heavy restrictions that they're under as a tier 2 apron team. Scoto does note that Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal do have trade value around the NBA. That makes a lot of sense. Teams want guys who can be scrappy, who can shoot the ball, provide some switchability on the wing, but both players are signed to manageable salaries, so the Phoenix Suns would have to be getting something that moves the needle, I think, to move either one of those guys. Both those guys fit pretty well with what the Suns want to do, and as solid contracts moving forward, I don't think there's going to be a lot of incentive for the Suns to move off of them. But again, if I'm an opposing team, I'm definitely calling on those two guys. And let's not forget, the Suns have a first-round pick in 2031 to offer. Boy, that could be dangerous, though. You've traded 2031 first, and you've built this team around Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is long gone by 2031. Who knows where Devin Booker is at that point? Bradley Beal, long gone by that point. Man, Phoenix has got to be careful with that 2031 first. You trade that thing and things don't go the way you want, boy, you could be handing over a really good asset to some team years down the road. That could be a crippling move for the franchise moving forward. So they're going to have to really consider things before they're going to give up a pick like 2031 when you know the stars that are on this team right now will almost certainly not be here in 2031. As far as the Hornets go, just to finish up with them, like I mentioned, they can flip Josh Okogie before the deadline. He is that nice non-guaranteed salary for next year, which is certainly helpful on the trade market. I think there will be some interest in him, especially if the Hornets are willing to absorb salary, long-term salary, and then Cody Martin. And you've got Micic as well as an interesting candidate for the Hornets to trade. But once again, they are going to be looking to be a seller on the market in order to add whatever kind of assets for the future that they can get. So look, at this point, I know a lot of people are saying, where's the big trades? Where's the big moves? But we've actually had a very active trade market. I mean, 4 trades already in the NBA, and we are still weeks away from the February 6th trade deadline. This has actually been a very active trade market, and I think it bodes well for what we're going to see on deadline day as well as right before. You guys know we're going to keep you updated on all things trade deadline with the NBA, breaking down everything, providing context that's needed to understand all of these moves that are happening as well as what is possible under the new CBA. So make sure you do subscribe right here to the channel and go check out our full breakdown of the Nick Richards trade landing in Phoenix. You can go check that out right now.